What is culture? Why do we need to understand culture? This is a very broad topic. Being part of a culture is central to all human existence. Reflect for a moment on the very important question, what is culture? Is culture the rules and customs, the traditions, the religion, the beliefs, the holidays that are celebrated, the food, the way we think and live? It is all of this, and more. It is that dimension that says who we are. What then is being culturally aware? It means being aware at a conscious level that we're in a changing world and that every day we come in contact with more and more people from different cultures. We need to recognize the basic facts that people do things differently in different cultures, including the way they function in schools and in the society at large. As we come in contact with people from other cultures, we need to recognize that we are affected by the winds of those cultures. What does that mean for us as teachers? It means that we recognize the diversity and the socio-cultural factors that affect our mainstream classroom, and that we can teach in a culturally sensitive way. Two faces that all of us are familiar with. Two different people, one from the culture and one who adapted to that culture. Gandhi taught the value of national pride, understanding, accepting, and respecting his own culture. So think about this. Go back to your own culture. What is it that binds you together? What is it that makes the behavior of others fairly predictable in your culture? Mother Teresa, she embraced another culture as a way of serving that culture and became interwoven with that culture. So sometimes we transcend the demands of a culture for a greater cause. What do we know about culture? Culture is learned. Culture is shared. Culture is an adaptation. And culture is always changing. It's always dynamic. Those are some of the things that we know. And that's what makes every culture a little bit different. Let's look at some definitions of culture. It's that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, law, morals, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. It includes everything people learn to do. Let's look at a couple of metaphors for culture. First one is the egg metaphor, where we think of the thin outer shell as the visible features of culture, the things you can see, the color of people, the way they dress, what they eat. The thick murky inside, what we see as the egg yolk and even some of the albumin, may be things that we take for granted that aren't quite so obvious about people. What influences them, how they learn to think the way that they do in a cultural way. The extent to which one adapts to the mainstream culture can be represented on a continuum, where on one end we have someone who isolates himself from the mainstream culture, and on the other we have someone who assimilates or melts in to that culture. With isolation comes stagnation and fossilization, but on the other end with assimilation comes loss of one's own ethnic identity. So when someone comes to this country and they want to be more like the kids that they're around, they're going to assimilate, and that's going to cause friction at home, where the people at home have not lost that identity and very much want to keep it. So that's something you're going to have to be aware of. The truly acculturated individual is bicultural and very often at least bilingual, if not more than two languages. Culture influences instruction. Our culture influences our schools and the way we learn. The way we function or don't function in this environment dictates the extent to which that person is going to be successful. Decisions made at the federal and state level have a lot of power to influence decisions made about our students. Members of a culture accept organization and structure given to schools. They accept the curriculum taught in those schools and generally maintain that the teaching and learning styles are the right ones for that culture. Here we have 3 levels of cultural adaptation. We have the person who assimilates, the person who is acculturated, and then the isolation or separatist view. As we learn more about cultures, we also become much more aware of some of these cultural differences. What does it mean to be cross-culturally aware? It means that we're going to go through some stages of cultural adaptation. We're going to learn some strategies of cross-cultural communication. We're going to overcome cross-cultural stereotypes, and we may change our point of view on some things and become aware of a lot of nonverbal communication cues that occur in all cultures. The impact of culture on teaching is immense. Learning doesn't take place in a vacuum. We have psychosocial factors involved because there's going to be things like anxiety when students come into a classroom where everything is different from what they're used to. They're going to have different perceptions. You're going to have different perceptions of what they think. The cultural factors such as non-assertive behavior or a non-competitive outlook are going to very much affect how you work with them in your classroom. Sociocultural factors are going to include things like their race and their ethnicity, the socioeconomic status that they had in their own country and that they now have in this country, language background, the literacy and educational background of their parents, the gender of the student, the geographic location that they came from, and your geographic location presently, where they now are. Personal factors include their own learning style, their own motivation, their cognitive ability, and a lot of background from their family. The role that we play as teachers in a school and the role the schools play, we have to look at the broader institution first, because it's an institution of learning and of socialization. So classroom environments are definitely cultural transmitters. Well, this is more than we want to delve into in any depth. We'll just mention a couple of things. The physical setup of the school or the classroom tells us a lot about how the learning will take place in that school or classroom. The school schedule tells us what we value. The curriculum definitely tells us what we teach and don't teach. The teacher's role has a lot of variety. Is the teacher a knowledge provider or a facilitator? How does the student see that teacher's role? So one of the things you want to look at is how you set your classroom up and how that is going to affect how the students relate to you and how they're used to relating to somebody in a teacher role. Culture definitely influences the schools. It influences what we teach when we teach it, and to some extent how we teach some things. Federal and state decisions are going to influence decisions on a local level with students. Members of each culture accept those decisions as being the decisions of that place. The way we teach is a product of our own culture and the way our culture taught us to learn. And so step back from the way you teach and rethink it. Allow yourself to think of it differently. When students possess the repertoires on which schools depend, they're predisposed to succeed in the school environment. So if a student has come out of a different type of school environment, they aren't going to know the protocols, they aren't going to know the routines that you're going to expect them to learn when they walk into your classroom. Students from families whose cultural values are similar to those of ours may be at an advantage in our schools, while those who come from either no schooling or a schooling very different from ours are going to be at a distinct disadvantage before they ever start. What is your role as a teacher? Good question. What can we adapt? What can we change? What can we learn? Those are 3 questions that we need to really look at with everything we do. When you understand the culture of your students, uh, you can introduce changes in your classroom practice that help students to reduce anxiety and for you to become more understanding of them. What are some of the things you can modify? Teaching styles, interaction patterns among students, the way the classroom's organized. To some extent, the curriculum and the way you teach it, you can differentiate it, and you can definitely change the way you interact with families and help them to interact with the community. And those are all things that you will have to look at changing as you get students in your class from other cultures. The first thing you want to do is learn about and reflect about yourself. Think about where you're coming from and what you can do differently. Talk to yourself. Think about yourself. Make notes. Ask everybody around you questions. Questions about yourself so that you understand why you do things the way you do it, and what you might be able to change in your thinking to better help those in your classroom. Some of the things you can do are just to write a description of yourself. Describe yourself at different ages. Describe your family. Describe your different teachers that were favorites or not favorites, and why, and how they shaped your learning and your thinking about teachers, and what was the knowledge environment of your home, and what have you observed about your parents with other children. Those are just a few things that you can start to think about with yourself to learn how you can better help someone else. Go a little further. Think about other cultures as you were growing up. Were you exposed to people from other cultures? What did you think about them? How about when you got to college? How have you changed how you think? What are your strongest beliefs? What beliefs guide the way you do things in your life? And what expectations do you hold of others? How do you resolve situations when there's a conflict, especially a conflict in values? Think about whether you've been encouraged to do open-ended exploration, or whether you were supposed to play quietly with certain approved toys, whether initiative was encouraged, what type of reading your parents did they read to you, did you discuss current events, were you allowed to ask questions, were there big discussions, were there lots of arguments, were you an avid reader when you were in school? Was the school you attended ethnically diverse? How would you characterize your learning style? And how and when did you learn about your ethnic identity, or have you?